Hello, welcome to Civilization Jihad Awareness, the show where truth wins every time. Well, let's talk about that term, civilization jihad. Where does it come from? Well, it's not something I created. It's not something any person born in America created. It is a term created by people who came from another country that were involved with the Muslim Brotherhood, who came here and wrote a document called the Explanatory Memorandum. And this document has one small paragraph I'm going to read to you. And this one document, this one paragraph, this small document, will tell you this is a very real war. Here's the paragraph. Understanding the role of the Muslim Brotherhood in North America. The process of settlement is a civilization jihadist process with all the word means. The Ikhwan, which is brotherhood, must understand that their work in America is a kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying the Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house by their hands and the hands of the believers, so that it is eliminated and God's religion is made victorious over all other religions. Without this level of understanding, we are not up to this challenge and have not prepared ourselves for jihad yet. It is a Muslim's destiny to perform jihad and work wherever he is and wherever he lands until the final hour comes. And there is no escape from that destiny except for those who choose to slack. But would the slackers and the mujahideen be equal? Again, this is not something I created. It is not something any American created. These are people who came from another country to start a subversive movement, seditious movement in the United States for the purpose of destroying the United States and Canada. Okay, so this is not just against us, it's against all of North America, this war. And I have with me today Dick Manasseri. Now, Dick Manasseri is the founder and leader of Sharia Crime Stoppers, and I'm going to bring him in pretty quick. So here we go. Hello, Dick. Thank you for listening. Hello, are you there?
Happy to be on.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Can you tell us a little bit about Sharia Crime Stoppers? I got a chance to, I should tell everybody, I got a chance to listen to Dick Manasseri's story when I was on a call for the Center for Security Policy last week, and he has pretty much the same story I had with Toronto, but your story had a little bit more issues, I think. So, Dick, why don't you just tell everybody what Sharia Crime Stoppers is first, and then let's get into what happened.
Sure. Well, most people know what Crime Stoppers are. That's kind of a partnership between citizens that are given information on how to be aware of potential crime and the law enforcement agencies that they partner with. We put the word Sharia in front of that because we've been studying Sharia and because we understand that Sharia is really important to understand the word Sharia. Sharia is the law system, if you will. It's the constitution for people that follow Islam, followers of Muhammad, people that call themselves Muslims. So we want to make it clear right up front. We think everybody is created in the image of God, and we respect every individual, including every person who might identify as a Muslim. So we're not anti-Muslim. But we are very aware, just because of a little bit of homework, it's interesting, we're not professional investigators, we're not journalists, we're just people that came across other people, including Frank Gaffney and Center for Security Policy, that got us started learning about Sharia. So just to make it clear, Sharia is Islamic law. Sharia is about 15% religious activity like prayer, how to pray, how to fast, how to celebrate religious holidays. And that 15% is religious practice, and it is supported by the First Amendment, and freedom of religion covers that. However, 85% of Sharia is very, very detailed politically. It's a political system, a military system. It's very, very detailed. It basically tells people who follow, either are compelled to follow Sharia or choose to, very many detailed things, how to enter a room with a certain foot, how to behave, etc. So it's very much of a constitution. And unfortunately, it's a constitution that says that people that follow Sharia, their job is to settle. Settlement was one of the words what you read. in a new territory and bring Sharia to be the law of the land. So if you have people in Michigan or New York State who are coming out of a mosque where an imam has reminded them about Sharia, some of those people are going to be inclined to move forward to make Sharia more pervasive, including the part that says it should replace the law of the land. We have a constitution that says that sedition, in Article 6, sedition is basically behavior that would replace the U.S. Constitution as the law of the land with some other system. So that's kind of the top of the pyramid would be jihad or mass murder. That's a crime. Sedition, replacing the Constitution, that's a crime. But we have other crimes that would affect the everyday life of women and children, like honor killing and FGM. And so our goal with Sharia Crime Stoppers is just to speak about the criminal behavior that is embedded in Sharia. And that part of Sharia is absolutely not protected by the First Amendment. The problem, Paul, is that police departments have been educated by the FBI and the Department of Justice to turn away from enforcing the law when the people involved in the crime happen to be Sharia compliant. And unfortunately, there's been no training for local police in New York or Michigan about criminal behavior associated with Sharia. So again, we have cases where honor violence is misdiagnosed. A single perpetrator is indicted, and there's no following up the tree to the people that might have been involved in honor violence. So our goal is just to make citizens and police aware. We also provide free of charge training, which is a pretty special opportunity. That training has been delivered 150 to 150 jurisdictions in the country. Unfortunately, we cannot break through in Michigan to get the training about Sharia into law enforcement. So in a nutshell, that's what we do, and we appreciate your interest.
I have a question for you from one of our listeners, and I think you partially answered it. He says, ask about the constitutionality of Sharia, how places like Minnesota, Michigan, etc. are getting away with allowing it or permitting it.
Well, this is a tie-in. There's a lot of examples in Michigan and in Minnesota, but we can also look to the city of London. You know, we think of London as a world capital with all kind of history of law and jurisprudence and some of our laws, etc. It turns out that if you look at the criminal behavior in England and certainly in Minnesota as well as in Michigan, you'll find that there is I think we can be pretty blunt on this show. There's a political correctness. There's a leftist mentality. There's a diversity. There's a multiculturalism that says everything is equal. I will forgive your sin. You forgive my sin. There is no judgments. And so this has led people to, out of a misunderstanding about Sharia, say that all of its behavior, all of its teachings, everything an imam said would be covered by the First Amendment. In fact, it's not really hard at all. And what we teach, we actually have a retired police chief who on his own has built two-day class for police officers, which explains exactly which part of Sharia is criminal, which part is protected by the First Amendment. You certainly don't want a policeman making a mistake and going after a practice that is religious. But if the behavior is not religious, if it's criminal, child marriage, polygamy, pedophilia, these are all things, believe it or not, that are sanctioned under Sharia, and that means that many of our 3,000 mosques have an imam which will discuss and talk about that behavior as being not just sanctioned, but in some cases prescribed by Sharia. And so if somebody wants to be Sharia compliant and they're in a situation where a young girl is getting too westernized or has a non-Muslim boyfriend or in any way bringing shame to the family, Sharia enables the father and or the mother to take the life of the 13-year-old, 15-year-old, and there's no repercussions. Under Sharia, they did nothing wrong because they, in fact, restored honor. Well, in America, it's a crime. And you need to understand that if you take a runaway girl as a policeman or social services person back to their Sharia-compliant home, you may be, in fact, leading to her suicide or physical harm or potential death by doing that. So, of course, you need to be trained. And that's kind of the underlying problem. So, back to your original question, the Constitution protects women and children. And if Sharia basically treats women and children as property, so, of course, there's a direct conflict between the Constitution and the freedom of equal protection under law for women. Sharia doesn't provide that.
And that's important. I mean, we talk about pedophilia. I think it was important. It is sanctioned in Sharia. I mean, you can just go to reading E11.0, where it's talking about a bath that women have to take after they have sex. And I'm just going to read a piece of this because I know that you're very knowledgeable of this. This, to me, was one of the first things I read, and I was so shocked to see that we would have we in America, anybody in America would catch this, where there is a bath that's required. I mean, kind of think about this. A bath required after sex kind of makes sense, you know. But the problem was the only time that bath isn't required is if it's only her husband's sperm, because she isn't old enough to have experienced the joy of sex. And it specifically talks about she's not old enough. And what are they talking about? She's prepubescent. So this is under Sharia. They're talking about it's okay to have sex with prepubescent girls, and and it says husband, so they're married. I'll give them that. But it's in our Western society, marrying a 10-year-old girl is not acceptable. And
but why is it acceptable under Sharia, Paul? And that's a good point. And the answer is that Sharia, in many ways, Sharia is based on the exemplary behavior of one man. That man would be Muhammad. Muhammad married a 6-year-old girl, and then consummated the marriage at the age of 9. And so we had an interview recently with a woman who was an ex-Muslim, and she is brave enough to come to Michigan and speak. I say brave enough because her father, when she left Islam, went to the imam and got a death sentence. It's called a fatwa on her head. But her point was, once you become 9 or 10 years old, you're a woman, whether you've in fact experienced puberty or not. Once you're at an age that they consider acceptable for sexual behavior, even if you are not sexually aware. So there's a whole, I got to say that women are property. So if women are property, this is outrageous, but of course, if women are property, then this follows along. And this is the kind of behavior that you just don't want to have in America, in Michigan and New York. If in a mosque, if women have a separate entrance, if women are covered, there are other indicators that the police are taught in this training to look and see if, in fact, there's likelihood that this is a Sharia-compliant mosque where behavior against women that's criminal might be taught, or God forbid, there might even be it may even be Sharia compliant enough that there's some activity related to even jihad. And of course, we've had examples of jihad. They just don't seem to wake people up in America. But this whole notion that we have 3,000 mosques, the fact that mosques traditionally for 1,400 years were more than places to worship. They are seats of government. Most mosques are enormous, and there is a relatively small area for prayer and a large area for meetings, for preparation. And historically, there's also where plans were made, whether they were violent or nonviolent plans to infiltrate. An attack might have been planned, or just how are we going to infiltrate the community college down the street, or how are we going to infiltrate the medical community in the area, etc. So we have this situation, and we've got started on this because we were watching the refugee resettlement program, and those numbers are down. But in the state of Michigan, we have a critical mass, so we already have more than enough. If you look historically at the percentages, and people watch those, I believe the percentage in London is certainly higher than 12%. I don't know the exact number, but there's let's just say 12 to 15% of the population of London are in fact, we would say they're Muslim. We would prefer to say that they're likely Sharia compliant. Well, again, if you're Sharia compliant and your numbers range between, let's say, 8 and 15% of the population, you have enough power, presence, accommodation, fear factor, as well as partners. If you're that big a part of the population, even at 8%, you have people in the community who want to do business with you. You have churches who want to bring you into their church so you can pray to Allah because that's their interfaith movement. And when you get to that point, you basically have, unfortunately, a blending of Islam and Christianity. There are actually churches, unfortunately, leaders, national leaders of churches, for example, the 1 million people that pay attention to the Pope are guided to see Islam and Christianity, Islam and Catholicism as partners in faith, working together in interfaith activities, and so you lose the judgment that would lead police to call out crime because they just turn away because everything somehow is protected by the First Amendment, and that's the biggest problem. That's not the case.
And it's important to understand that when we're talking about Sharia, we're not talking about anything that has to do with religion. We're talking about politics once we start talking about Sharia. Or we're talking about a separate law that has nothing to, really, in many sense, nothing to do with, because Sharia is law. It's law that's everyone, that Muslims expect everyone to follow. It's not just them following it. Can you tell us about what happened with you this past week? The event that you shared with the group on Friday.
Yeah, so we have, of course, most people in America know there's a place called Dearborn, and you just kind of got numb about it. Okay, that's just a big place where there's a big Arab community. It's a lot more than that. We have a lot of other no-go zones, but Dearborn is the one that people think about. There was a free speech rally that was held in the parking lot of a police station, which was a very good judgment call. And it was a rally, including the woman I mentioned who had been raised in Muslim house and now had the fatwa on her head. She's an ex-Muslim, and several other speakers. We had Antifa. As we got there, there was an Antifa march with a big banner. We love Muslims and other slogans related to open borders, etc. So remember, I think your audience knows Antifa is a leftist organization that connects the dots between, well, first of all, they're the German Communist Party. That's basically what they are. They're the German Communist Party before they switched into being Nazis. Okay, so Antifa, talking about fascism. And so they're very, very aggressive and in your face. And if there's an opportunity for physical pushing and shoving or worse, that does occur. Well, in this case, the police did a good job. They had a barricade up, and there was about a 50-foot gap, and then there was another barricade, and then we were on the other side with a free speech rally. We have some videotape on websites that I can give you in a minute, and you can hear in the background as the people were speaking about free speech, there was a nonstop verbal abuse on megaphones from the Antifa crowd. I think it would have gotten worse except for the fact that the police had a very controlled setup. What was significant was just there's a belligerence. Verbally, it's violent in the sense that the verbal abuse is quite aggressive. The F-bomb is in every sentence, whether it's a woman or a man, whether it's a labor union guy. Interestingly, that was nonstop for an hour and a half as we had our rally. And again, I would suggest that even in the last few months, you've seen Antifa becoming more and more aggressive. Unfortunately, fortunately for Michigan, the weather's warmer. Unfortunately, this means that events, including events that lead up to elections and debates and a primary that we have in August, unfortunately, probably Antifa will be more active, and it will be more difficult to have events without extra security, which we understand, and we will have extra security.
Now, what kind of violence did you see? Was anybody hurt while you were there? Or?
No, there was. I want to make it clear. The violence was verbal. If without the police, I think there would have been enough. There was a lot of antagonism. If you scream in a megaphone for an hour and a half, you can get people really, really riled up. The reason there wasn't physical violence was there was a metal barricade, and there were uniformed police in between the two groups. But I will say this: when the woman who had the fatwa on her head, when she got up to the podium to speak, there were 5 people that were her security that stood around her, just like the Secret Service would protect the president. And so it was chilling. Again, free speech rally. Again, keep in mind, if you look at what's happened in Europe and Canada, the incremental step of civilization jihad is to get to a point where you have enough Sharia-compliant people in the community to affect legislation and call hate crimes, provide hate crimes, and aggressively train people on how to police to look for hate crimes, give people a hotline. If they get offended, they call a number. So while we cannot get police effectively trained, by the way, again, we're not negative on individual policemen, and we've had individual policemen reach out to us. The problem is, in the state of Michigan, many city councils are extremely liberal, and they hire the police chief. And so even if you have policemen who would come forward and say, we really don't understand honor violence. We really don't know how to look for child marriage. We really don't understand in a Sharia-compliant way how to deal with human trafficking. All of those are relevant conversations. How about getting some training? And the answer is, even if the police chief has an interest, he's hired and fired by the city council. We can talk about individual towns here that have really adopted a red-green axis, meaning the left and Islam working together. And so you're not going to get the training that you need. So that's kind of a phenomenon. If you do have that level of infiltration, you're going to basically be unprepared, even though you took an oath. And let me jump ahead. We've been in police environments where they've taken the training. I've been to Alabama twice for two-day classes, and the county sheriff understands the problem, invites the 10 towns in his county to send their policemen to a class. 60 policemen come there for 2 days, men and women with firearms, committed to take care of us and make us safe, risk their lives every day. And they were livid when they took the training, delivered by the retired policemen, and they realized that they have been kept from this training by the federal government since 2012. The reason it's relevant is that the Muslim Brotherhood has targeted policemen. So if you look at online videos from the Muslim Brotherhood, even though they emanate from the Middle East, they're connected to the Muslim Brotherhood in America. And those broadcasts trying to radicalize people in America are telling them that they should identify as targets. If they do get to jihad violence, they should identify policemen, and they should actually know where policemen live. In fact, one online program actually listed the home addresses of policemen. So police are livid that they took the oath and that they have not been trained and they don't know how to do their job. And they're very serious people about their oath. So the same is true with our military. We do not get training. So this is a real problem. I've got a story to tell you about the FBI, but I think I probably should break here and let you ask me a question.
This is interesting because I had John Glondolo on recently, and a lot of what you're saying backs up what he's saying too. So I find this fascinating. I'm also curious, have you seen the article in National Geographic that just came out?
Probably not, no.
Okay, it's called Being Muslim in America by Layla Fadel. Now, she is from what I've read of her, doing a little bit of research, she is, I believe, a Sufi Muslim. And one of the things that's in here, which I think you would find fascinating, is a map that's labeled Progress in Spite of Prejudice. And she has the percentages of Muslims all the way across America, and in some areas highlighted, there's like the Dearborn area highlighted. There's 49 mosques there. Buffalo, New York, and she has the percentages of this stuff. All like Dearborn, they're they're about 15%, and we talk about the percentages being important to them. And it's interesting that this is done displaying where the percentages are, displaying where there are more mosques than other places. I find that whole thing fascinating. In my own area, where I live in Rochester, New York, is between 5 and 15%. Mm-hmm. And that I've watched the progression happen here. We've gone from having we had two malls put together, and it became, quote, the largest mall on the Eastern Seaboard for a little while on the East Coast. And now the older mall is pretty much entirely Muslim. I mean, the stores, you walk through there, I think you can count 30 people within maybe 15 minutes to a half hour walking through Sharia compliant in clothing. And to me, that was I grew up in that neighborhood. I'm just mind blown to see that change. And I recommend people pick this up. I have issues with several things in here. I'm hopefully going to be writing something about it, but it's nice to see what I say. Pick it up only for the fact I think it's important we know what they're doing. This is National Geographic is not something I usually pick up anymore. I do like the pictures, but there is something interesting in here who they're putting up as the idol Muslim that they all want to be like, Warith Deen Muhammad, and that kind of surprised me. I didn't expect them to do that.
It's interesting. We have malls as well, and we certainly have. I don't live near Dearborn. I live near Troy. I live near Sterling Heights and Warren. Those are places where you're beginning to see. You definitely have visual evidence about people that are Sharia compliant. Here in Rochester Hills, where I live, you start to see that. The point I want to make is if you go to a mall and you get up in the morning and you're a woman, you're going to meet your friends, you dress in your normal Western civilization clothes. You're not covered. You're not a Sharia compliant woman. You have no interest in doing that. When you go to the mall, when you start to see Sharia compliant women covered, remember that many Sharia compliant women are proper. Well, all Sharia compliant women who cover themselves in particular are with a hijab or another outfit are in fact the property of men. That's Sharia. So that means somewhere in the vicinity of the woman who's covered, who's walking through the mall, is a man who's Sharia compliant. They typically don't go out by themselves. When that man looks at 40 or 50 women next to the covered woman, perhaps walking down the mall, he sees women that are not covered. Sharia tells him that those 40 or 50 women are targets with impunity. Sanctioned behavior against those women who are not covered includes sexual harassment and rape. So the very fact that you start to see covered women in the mall means that there are other people with them who see the uncovered women as targets for sexual abuse and or rape. And when we say that, people it's very difficult to digest and understand, but that is in fact fundamental Sharia. And so, for example, if you're a woman and you come out of a restaurant or a nightclub in the evening, and particularly if they serve alcoholic beverages there, and you get in the back of a cab, if the cab driver is Sharia compliant, Sharia would sanction him locking the door and proceeding to sexually harass or rape you. How could that be in America? Now, has that happened? Yeah, we have an indictment for that in Michigan. We have an indictment for female genital mutilation, and we have an indictment for what we're going to call probably honor violence. It's not being investigated that way. So these are real crimes. I would also suggest that we know there's certainly polygamy going on with the doors closed in homes that are not being investigated, and even young women who are, as we talked about earlier, Paul, married to older men. Those young girls are out maybe playing soccer, maybe with my granddaughter. I go to pick up my granddaughter. This other little girl that she's playing with gets picked up by an older man. And maybe, that person's not the father, that's her husband. Well, this is not acceptable. This is America. And yet, it is unfortunately becoming incrementally normal.
And that is the big fear. I mean, this is why we need to wake. This is why I do everything I'm doing. We can't accept this, and we have to fight against it. And the biggest thing we can do today, as we're fighting, is information. Get these truths out, the news out, of what's happening. I do what I can with sharing news stories every day.
Yep.
But I think what you're doing, working with the police, and just like John Guandolo is doing, I'm amazed the amount of stories I hear from people. I talk with police officers whenever I get a chance, and that they have no clue about even the connection between terrorism and how you can pick what more likely these people would be more likely to commit an act of terror simply by you can recognize their Sharia code of dress.
Exactly.
They're more, and you can physically recognize these things. It's something police officers really need to know because they're the ones that are the point men.
Right. John Guandolo does a great job, and our police chief as well. They both do really good jobs of giving indicators of radicalization, which is really critical. If you have time, I'd like to just give a couple of references if people want to learn more about Sharia Crime Stoppers.
Please.
The best way to learn
share
about
that.
Is a page on the United West. So if you go to theunitedwest.org, on the top banner you'll see Sharia Crime Stoppers. And when you go to that page, you'll see a list of Sharia crimes. It's updated 4 times a week, as well as interviews, perhaps like the one we're having here, and then information about how to get more information about the training that is available. Again, the training's available at no cost except for travel expenses. And again, the irony is I don't know that John Guandolo or our program has in any way been accepted into the state of Michigan. The other thing you'll find on that website is information that I think we talked about on the call, and that is the fact that the percentages, 8%, 15%, are important. But the other one is when you're in this range, you will see more and more political candidates surfacing who are Sharia compliant. We know there's probably at least 90 candidates for different offices in America that are Sharia compliant. And probably the top of the tree would be the governorship of one of the 50 states. And we have the situation in Michigan where on August the 7th, 89 days from now, people will go into a booth, Democrat ballot or Republican ballot. On the Democrat ballot is a man named Abdul Rahman El Sayed. And Abdul is a Sharia compliant young man who's a medical doctor. His wife's a doctor. They're both Sharia compliant. She wears a hijab. And they are actually have a good shot at becoming the Democratic candidate for the governor of one of our states, of Michigan. So we're trying to focus attention on that. We're inviting people to learn about when we say that they're Sharia compliant, what do we mean? What is Sharia? And we go back to the point Paul made initially. The explanatory memoranda and other literature is available online. Frank Gaffney, the Center for Security Policy, has done 2 videos in the last 2 weeks directed at Michigan or anybody that cares that Michigan might be a national security threat to the United States. If Michigan elects a Sharia-compliant governor who happens also to be left of Bernie Sanders and wants to make Michigan a sanctuary state, there are people who know, and I would suggest people, Frank Gaffney, John Guandolo, and other people who are genuinely concerned about the future of America if one of the 50 states makes a turn in the direction of the red-green axis. So if you have Abdul El Sayed and he becomes the governor of Michigan, that's bad news for people in New York and people in Oklahoma.
Well, can you just reiterate what the red-green axis is? Because I don't know that everyone would know that who's listening. I do want to say if Michigan goes, see, that affects Canada. That affects me here in New York because there is a land bridge between Michigan and New York, and it is called Canada. That's part of it. And yeah, so that's a huge point. And that is, it's a land bridge that, I mean, I've gone as far as London on that land bridge, and they have their own difficulties there. They're about, I say they're close to 15% there, or darn close to it. You can't walk down a street without seeing a woman in a full burqa and hijab and everything. It's amazing. I'm just, again, watch your communities, because this should tell you we need to wake up more, because when you start seeing this stuff happen around you, you've got to start doing things to wake these police up.
To go back to the red-green axis, which I think was a really good point, let me just make a comment before we even go there. If you have 2% and you think you're not involved in this, remember, if you're in the United States of America, there are 50 states. Your tax money goes into Washington and gets funneled out to each of the 50 states. So you would care, probably, even if you're just 2% where you live, if Michigan were to become a sanctuary state run by a Sharia-compliant governor, and therefore incrementally Sharia is more normal. We have 140 mosques. If Abdul El Sayed is the governor of Michigan, Sharia will become incrementally more normal. By the way, again, I don't think I mentioned it, but he's a former vice president of the Muslim Student Association, and his wife came a couple of years after him at the University of Michigan. She was the president of the Muslim Student Association. Her father was a past president of the Muslim Brotherhood front group called CARE, which directly funnels money into Hamas. So we have a father-in-law still involved in a leadership position in the Muslim Brotherhood. We have Linda Sarsour, who is a national figure promoting the red-green axis. The red is the leftist agenda, the agenda that promotes all the leftist issues you can think about. And the green is Islam. Now, why would they work together? Well, a good example is in Michigan. They work together because they basically want to transform the United States. Obviously, the fundamental transformation that Obama talked about, that Hillary promoted, would basically be taking down the U.S. Constitution, which they would criticize, and college students learn is a racist document. By the way, it was built on Judeo-Christian principles. By the way, there's something wrong with the Judeo-Christian principles, and these are people that hate other people, and the problems we have today are white supremacists. So all of that fits in very nicely with the narrative for Islam. If, in fact, America needs to be transformed because it was a racist, it has a racist constitution initially. The people that were part of the Constitution were these people that read the Bible, whether they're Jews or Christians. They cling to their guns. When you take the leftist narrative and you put that close, you intertwine with that. Can't we all get along? Isn't diversity great? Oh, well, look at this. We don't really need the Constitution. Look, here's another Constitution called Sharia. Well, maybe in Michigan we should have Sharia should be okay, just like it is in London. So think about it. London is about 50%, and London has Sharia councils, meaning you can have certain situations adjudicated not by the British jurisprudence, but by Sharia. You have grooming gangs that have been going on for years without the police protecting people, and you have a major increase in crime. You have 9 million people, and they elected Sadiq Khan, who is a Sharia-compliant Muslim, over 9 million people in London, and the crime rate is way up. Well, Michigan has 9 million people. If Michigan were to follow suit and elect Abdul El Sayed, we might have similar problems. By the way, before I forget, I want to mention we have a very knowledgeable international journalist coming to Michigan. Her name is Katie Hopkins. Some of your listeners may know Katie Hopkins. She's been on Fox News with Hannity and Tucker Carlson. She's coming to Michigan specifically to shed light on this problem. She lives in London. She understands the increased crime rate. She understands what it's like for women to be in and around no-go zones that exist in London. And unfortunately, she knows that Michigan is probably the closest to London in terms of these percentages, in terms of an increase in criminal behavior. And she also knows the problem in London is the police have looked the other way for 5, 10, 15 years. And that's part of the Michigan story, unfortunately, now. So Katie Hopkins will be with us. She will be doing a webinar. It's a national webinar. People can go to a website to register for the webinar. It's actually going to be on the 19th of May at 7 o'clock. And if people are interested, they can go to a website The website is the word Secure Michigan, one word, securemichigan.org, and there's a link to register for the webinar. You can sit at home. If you know who Katie is or you watch Fox News, you can sit at home and listen to and watch Katie. She will be making the comparison between London and Michigan, and she will have spent 3 days in Michigan, including Dearborn. She'll have been to our state capitol. She's going to be talking to individual people running for governor on the Republican side. And one quick last comment on this topic, and I appreciate your patience with my long-winded answers. The Republicans are equally responsible. It's not just the red-green axis. It's the uniparty. The uniparty are people that include Democrats, Islamic supremacists, and the Republican Party that wants cheap labor. So the problem in Michigan is the Republican Party is progressive. They listen to the Chamber of Commerce. They want immigration. The position of the current governor, who's a Republican, on immigration is not unlike the position of El Sayed, who wants a sanctuary state. Well, Michigan has sanctuary cities, and our Attorney General, who's running for governor, and our current governor have not been particularly upset about having sanctuary state cities in the state. So we have the Republicans. We have one exception. We have one Republican candidate. His name is Patrick Kovac. He's made a presentation on Sharia, which is extremely brave, and he's been crucified for that by the Republican Party and others. So here's a man who's explained the explanatory memorandum to the public in Michigan, has talked about the plan to replace the Constitution with Sharia, has signed a pledge that he will have zero tolerance for sedition and jihad, and he will have zero tolerance for FGM and honor violence and rape. This man has caused a firestorm by his boldness, and the Republicans, his competition for the Republican nomination, are basically brutally attacking him and never dealing with the issues. It basically have not dealt with. They will not answer the question whether Sharia is compliant with the Constitution.
This is all extremely important information you're sharing, and one of the reasons why I was just listening to your talk on Friday, and I was just thinking we need to hook up and we need to get your story out here, and I hope that somehow we can work together offline too. I can't wait to see if there's something we can do together to do whatever we can to get the word out. I don't know what we can do these days. What's happening in Michigan, people, it's a lot scarier in truth than when you're there, you're visiting. I think that is overwhelming. I don't know if it really hit home when you went to Dearborn the first time, but just going as far as London in Canada, that was. I mean, I talk about civilization jihad, and it didn't hit home for me. I didn't even think about it, this whole concept, until it became personal for me. Nazareth College here locally took $500,000 from IIIT, and then figuring out what that was, I think we have to feel that personal hit. Maybe that's what Americans need to do, but we need to do that now. We can't just sit around and wait. And that's my fear, is we're going to be too appeasing, too complacent, and allow some of these dangerous risks in national security. Michigan is in the middle of the is pretty much in the middle of the country in some ways, on the northern border, but it could become a huge national security risk, even bigger than.
You're doing a great job. You're doing a great job by exposing this. Let's face it, I think both of us have a lot of respect for Frank Gaffney, the Center for Security Policy, John Guandolo, Claire Lopez, Trevor Loudon, Robert Spencer. And if you look at what's going on, they would not be speaking about Michigan in the last 2 weeks with videos and articles if they didn't believe. They don't live in Michigan. They believe, and I think there's evidence that they're trying to wake up people that Michigan could be a national security issue for the rest of the country, and like I said, to be having a program dedicated to civilization jihad, when most people want to sleep through this war, you think you probably wake up, and I do. And again, I was in Dearborn yesterday. I sat right next to an imam. I was there on purpose to learn what was going on, and I listened to a very, very friendly, accommodating, actually entertaining presentation by the imam that was loaded with misinformation and outright lies, that was all about interfaith, and we have so many things in common, when in fact, the explanatory memorandum says exactly the opposite. But the pervasiveness of and the acceptability of let's go back to the leftist churches, when you think of something as personal as the churches that people go to, and that those churches are looking the other way, or are afraid, or want to wrap themselves around Islam, thinking maybe that they will not be somehow damaged, or, it's happening. There's an empty church. The archbishop wants to get some money. They sell it to Islam to build a mosque. This is going on. And when you wake up and you think, when you realize, as I think you do, Paul, we're at war, but almost everybody that you see in a given day doesn't know it, doesn't want to know it. And you're the enemy, Paul, because you might actually break the drowsiness of that person. You might actually open a crack and get them to think about a really difficult and deadly topic. Therefore, they don't really want to deal with this. And so you might be ignored, and you might also be called a white supremacist or a hater, simply because you want to tell
the
what
truth.
you've investigated is the truth, right?
Yeah. I want to thank you for joining us. I did want to ask a question. Is your organization directly tied to United West? I was trying to figure that one out, because we go straight there to do your site.
If you're interested in learning more about Sharia Crime Stoppers, or you just want to read articles about Sharia crime, or you want to read articles about the political situation in Michigan, all of that is found on United West, and that's a great source. The link that we have for the webinar with Katie Hopkins actually can be found on the other website that we're involved in, and that's called securemichigan.org. So securemichigan.org or the unitedwest.org.
I'm going to be promoting your organization and Secure Michigan on many resources on social media. Thank you for joining us, and Sassy, you go with God's blessings, as you have. We've got a mighty work ahead of us.
We do.
Be
Thank
careful.
you so much, Paul. Thank you. God bless you.
God bless.